Hello and welcome to my video for worksheet number NS11 for my night school Casey class. If you are not currently open to the worksheet that says NS11 in the top left hand corner, not like my right hand corner, you need to pause the video, flip to it. Once you're there, hit play again. So let's get started. Number 1 in the guided practice at the top says to simplify radical 49. This little symbol right here is called a radical. To do this, you're going to use factor trees. Your multiplication tables will help you a lot here. Can you do it in your head? Yeah, I'm about to, but multiplication tables just make it a lot easier. Especially since 49 happens to be called a perfect square. We'll explain that a little bit later. So, looking at the multiplication table, if you just search through it, you'd actually find a 49. But let's go ahead and work it out the longhand way. So 49, we need to find what two numbers multiply into each other to get 49. Ideally, we pick, if possible, a number that times itself equals 49, which in this case is 7. So two numbers that multiply into each other to get the number at the top of the arrow, which is 49. So since 7 times itself is 49, that means the square root, because this is called a radical, this symbol, but what's asking you to do is find the square root of 49. So the square root of 49 is 7. And that's it. That's why I say your multiplication table is your workhorse for this problem. It will do all the work for you, except for write it for you with the pencil. Question number 2. The area of a square is 9 square meters. How long is one of the sides? Okay, this is radical 9 in disguise. Really, all they could have said here is, just like the last problem, simplify radical 9. How did I figure that out? Because a square has all sides equal to each other. And the clue is square, square root, perfect squares, numbers that multiply into itself to get something, square meters, 9. These are all clues that this is a square root problem. Find the square root. So let's go ahead and solve it that way. Again, your multiplication table is your workhorse here, but let's write it out. What two numbers can multiply into 9? Now we never want to do 9 and 1 because that doesn't tell us anything. That means that there's nothing in common there. You don't want to repeat the number. You want to use the number in the factor tree as its own factor. So even though technically it is a factor of 9, so is 1, you wouldn't do it that way. Instead, you find other choices. So in this case, the only other choices for factors are 3 times 3. That means your answer to the area of a square of 9 square meters, how long is one of the sides? One of the sides is 3. And again, to go back to the idea of a square, all the sides are equal, so if you take any two sides and multiply them, you get the area of that square. All the sides are equal, so 3 times 3 is 9. Your sides are going to equal to a square. 9 square meters. You don't need to draw this out, but you can. But if you can recognize that this is just that kind of problem, it'll save you time. Save the drawing for later on when you get into geometry. Question number 3, moving right along. Simplify negative radical 100. Radical, this negative, do not let it scare you. In fact, right now, just ignore it. For now, we'll come back to it, but ignore it for now. And just solve it like we did the other problems. So we're going to ignore the negatives and let's find factors. This one, maybe it might be a perfect square, but here's the thing. Unlike the previous problems, these numbers show that it's not a perfect square because, or it is a perfect square because two numbers, a number times itself equals 100, but these numbers also have factors. That's why it's called a factor tree. So you'll actually have to make two more trees and figure out what multiplies to get into them. See, on the previous problems, there wasn't anything further, because remember what I said? Don't use itself in one. Can't ever do that. So sometimes you just stop. Like, so when you get to 3, if that's only your choice, you just stop. But in this case, 10 has more factors than 10 and 1, so you got to keep going until you get numbers where you can't. You can't factor them any further without using itself in 1. So now how do we turn this into an answer? All right, so first let's make matches in pairs. We've got two 2's. So for my answer, I'm going to start writing a 2. Then we've got two 5's. So I'm going to do multiply 5. And there's no other things dangling. So that means the radical is going to fly away. 5 times 2 is 10. And before you can stop, I should have put a D earlier. Before you can stop, go back and get that negative. Remember I said ignore it for now. Come back, bring that negative down here. Oh. And then that's your answer, negative 10. Pretty simple math. This radical thing is not that bad. It can be, but for these problems, it probably won't. And again, your multiplication table can find all these numbers for you. Drawing that thing out will save you a lot of time. Just don't forget the negative, because you ignored it first, then bring it back at the end. Four, the last problem. All right. The square root of 17 lies between which two consecutive numbers? What? Oh, excuse me, consecutive whole numbers, because that makes it better. All right, some of you might be thinking like, no, next question, skip this, but it's not that bad. First of all, consecutive means back to back. There are some mathematical formulaic ways to solve this, but here's the quick way. Find the perfect squares diagonal on your multiplication table. So you have your multiplication table and you go down diagonal from top left to bottom right. Follow that down. You can open it up in Symbaloo. I have it there for you. Those are your perfect squares. Now, in that diagonal going across the multiplication table, pick the two numbers that 17 can fit in between. That will be 16 and 25. The two numbers that will be right back with each other. Consecutive. Not consecutive, because 16 and 17 are consecutive. 16 and 25 are not. But you want to find the two numbers that are closest to each other that 17 goes in between. You should see exactly what I mean on the multiplication table. You're going to want to write those down and then put a radical on them. 16, 25. And because you have your multiplication table and you already found them on the multiplication table, you already know what the square root of both of these are. Meaning your answer, it's going to be two answers. It's going to be 4, because the square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of 25 is 5. So that's your answer. Thank you, and that's it for NS11.